Good evening to all of you. I thought that this week I would go ahead and do a little summary of Immanuel Kant's philosophy, or at least what we discussed about his philosophy, his ethical theory. And so I will repeat some of the things I've done before, but right now I also put together a PowerPoint that you can follow together with the video so you can see how the most important parts actually that we have discussed so far. So from the beginning, he has this claim about the goodwill that it is the only thing good without qualification. Nothing else in the world can be conceived good without qualification because he says, as we discussed before, features of character that we may normally consider good are sometimes problematic because if they are accompanied by a bad will, we do not enjoy uh, how they manifest themselves in other human beings. So, for example, an evil human being, if he has the virtue of being courageous, the courage itself produces more harm than good, especially because an evil human being who's also courageous may do more harm to other human beings. So now the problem is for him how to figure out what the goodwill is. And if you look at the next slide, you have the four types of action. The action contrary to duty, those are actions that we do against what we are required to do, that those are not problematic, clearly bad actions. But then you have three kinds of actions which are all in accordance with duty, but only one of them is done out of duty or performed from duty, and only in that one you can see the goodwill. The first one, so the second action in accordance with duty performed from some indirect inclination. I do something not because I perceive it is good, but rather because I perceive that doing so will produce some sort of benefit for me. And Kant's example is a shopkeeper who is not overcharging children, although he could do so, but he doesn't for selfish reasons. He's afraid that he might have a bad reputation afterward and so on. The action in accordance with duty performed from a direct inclination to do the action is a little bit more problematic, especially because we seem to enjoy the action and we seem to often appreciate the action. And Kant says the problem with this action is that we cannot say that it has moral worth. What an example would be to do something good for other human beings, not because we think it's our duty to do so, but rather because we enjoy to do so. So it's a sympathetic neighbor in Kant's case. Or we talked about it before. If I am sick and if I am in the hospital, but if you are inclined to do something good for me because you say, oh my God, poor Tavi, he needs some help and all that, and he brings some flour to the hospital out of your good heart, the action itself does not have moral worth unless you do it, Kant would say, out of duty or out of your goodwill. Goodwill is not inclination. And the goodwill can be seen only in type 4 action, which are action in accordance with duty, performed from duty, and Kant says the dutiful person is cold and indifferent yet beneficent. So, if you think about the hospital case, you think Tavi doesn't deserve any kind of flowers, or you don't want to give him any, or you don't feel like going to the hospital because you have other things to do and so on. But nevertheless, you go to the hospital and give some flowers to the sick human being, mainly because you know it's the right thing to do, even if you have no inclinations to do so. So, what is the problem here? What is the important aspect here? Kant says the real moral worth, as you can see on the next slide, have only those actions that are performed from duty. But normally we would say that we enjoy when people do things for us because they want to do some, and we don't like when people do things for us even if they are while they are against doing so because they don't enjoy to do so. And people have criticized Kant for being a little bit too harsh and showing that we all have to be cold and beneficent in order to show moral duty. And there is a guy, Friedrich Schiller, who wrote in the 19th century as well. And he says, I'm going to read, "Gladly I serve my friends, but alas I do it with pleasure. Hence I am plagued with doubt that I am not a virtuous person. Sure, your only recourse is to try to despise them entirely, and then with aversion to do what your duty enjoins you." So what Schiller says is that moral worth depends on not doing something by or from inclination, and that moral worth in this sense requires me to despise my friend and to do my duty with repugnance. That's how Schiller interprets Immanuel Kant's theory. But now we have to think about, is Schiller right when he criticizes Kant? Or are other critics right when they say that Immanuel Kant is someone who encourages human beings to be cold and indifferent in order for them to be able to act from duty? There are three ways in which we have to look at this problem. First of all, we have to think about whether Kant says what Kant says about actions done out of inclinations. And he says they could be type 3 actions, right? They could be dutiful and amiable, and they deserve praise and encouragement, but they should not be esteemed as having moral worth, because they lack moral worth. And if you think about it, if I do things because this is how I am, I shouldn't be praised for that because I haven't done anything for that, If I don't know, if I play a sport and I do it without any kind of training, but I do it just because I was born this way, I am not the one who deserves any praise, but rather the people who made me, or nature, or God, or whatever you want to say about who created me, but it's not me. I have to be praised for the things I worked for. And if you apply this to Kant's morality, then the thing that has to be praised is the action done out of duty, not done of inclination, one action that I could not do otherwise because that's how I'm inclined to do so. Forgive me. Then the other part is, well, does Kant say that the moment in which I have an inclination to do good things, does that count against the action having moral worth? And Kant doesn't say that, if I'm inclined to do good things, then my action clearly is going to have no moral worth. The problem for him is, what is my motivation to do the action? If I rely on my inclination, then obviously the action doesn't have moral worth. It's praiseworthy, we should encourage it, but it doesn't have moral worth. If, however, I act out of duty, then the action shows moral worth. The point is that I cannot realize whether my action is done out of duty or done out of inclination unless the inclination is absent, and only then I can see the goodwill being shining like a jewel, and so on, as Kant says. The other part that we have to remember about what Kant says on type 3 actions is that they are admirable and deserve encouragement. As I mentioned, they are just not moral worthy. So he does not say that we should not cultivate them, or he does not say at the same time that we should cultivate inclinations that are contrary to duty. Instead, he claims clearly that those inclinations that are according to duty should be praised and encouraged. Okay, so that's the first part. The other part that we discussed is the difference between hypothetical and categorical imperative, and we said that hypothetical imperatives are those which we give to ourselves the moment in which we have a purpose. In order to achieve something, we have to do certain things, and the categorical imperatives do not have anything beyond them, but they are necessary, unconditional, and universal, and the action have to be done without reference to anything else, but only with reference to itself. And moral obligation for Kant clearly is based upon the categorical imperative. And the universal law of formulation of the universe of the categorical imperative goes this way: act only according to that maxim, by which you can at the same time will, it should become a universal law. So what does it mean? We have all the time, anytime we act in a certain way, we give ourselves a maxim according to which we act. In order for us to see whether our action is permissible or forbidden, we have to try a test for that maxim. How do we do that? We universalize that. So look on the slide in which you have the deceitful promise for loan. We have the maxim, and the maxim is, whenever I believe myself to be in need of money, I will borrow money and promise to pay it back, although I know I shall never do so. What do I do then? I universalize my maxim. It is universal law of nature that everyone in need of money borrows money and promises to repay the loan, knowing he or she shall never do so. If I can will that my maxim and the universalization can take place at the same time, then then the action that will be done according to the maxim, which is borrowing money when I may need to do so, promising at the same time that I will give them back, but knowing that I will never do so, and at the same time the universalization, so the maxim would become universal law. If I cannot desire both of them at the same time, then my maxim is forbidden. That means the maxim does not pass the test because it cannot be universalized, and I cannot will the universalization and the maxim at the same time. If the maxim passes the test, so if I can will the maxim and I can will the universalization without getting into contradictions, then the maxim is permissible, which means I can do it without disobeying any kind of moral law. The problem in the deceitful promise for loan is that we have the contradiction, because the moment in which such a maxim becomes universal law of nature, it would deny my purpose itself. And my purpose is to make a false promise in order to get out of a problem. But I cannot make false promises if that is a universal law of nature, because nobody will believe me. Forgive me. So my maxim and the universalization cannot be both of them desired or willed at the same time, which means that making deceitful promises are contrary to duty. But we see that the good will is a will whose principle is always to act upon universalizable maxims. And that's quite important for Kant. You have a funny joke over there, I think. I mean, from my perspective, it's funny. I want to stop philosophizing, but I can't. So anytime I act on goodwill, what I act on are own maxims which can be universalizable. And that makes me a potential legislator of the law of nature. And that's why Kant goes after the first formula of the categorical imperative. He goes to the second formula, the formula of humanity of the categorical imperative. You have the page number bad there. Act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. So this is a little bit of a summary of Kant. I thought that if I do this summary, perhaps things would become more clear, especially with this philosopher who's a little bit difficult. Starting next week, we'll begin case studies. And please remember, those of you who are on the first week, to send me the case studies. You do have the list. I sent it to you a couple of weeks ago, I think. Take care. Have a good night. Bye.